I'm going to start in a place where some of you probably expect me to, others do not, and that is with the vote this evening, late afternoon, in the Indiana Senate, in which the Indiana Senate rejected a new mid-decade redistricting map for the House of Representatives, the US House of Representatives, that the Trump administration had put enormous pressure on them to pass. And the vote wasn't even close. The vote was 31-19, which meant that 21 Republicans, the majority of the Republican conference, voted with the Democrats to say no to those new gerrymandered maps. I think this is a big deal. And here's why it's a big deal. It's a big deal because Trump and his cronies are putting huge pressure on Republican-dominated state legislatures to change the maps for the House of Representatives before the 2026 elections. Now, this is really rare. It's extremely rare for a state legislature to redistrict in the middle of a decade, because normally redistricting happens every 10 years because of our census that is mandated by the Constitution every 10 years, in which all the people in an area are counted, and that counting determines how many seats the members of that state will get in the House of Representatives. And in 1929, that number was capped at a certain level. Until then, it just kept increasing. And had it continued to increase according to the formula that was in play before 1929, we would have a House of Representatives that has more than 1,000 people in it. So this capping of the number of people in the House of Representatives has skewed the representation in the House of Representatives away from the more populous states, which is another thing we don't talk enough about, and one of the things we're going to have to fix going forward in the Electoral College, because the Electoral College is made up of the number of representatives a state has plus 2 for that state's senators, and that's how you get the Electoral College, which is actually interesting. Someday I'm going to do a lecture just on the Electoral College. But anyway, the reason that this vote in Indiana is so important is because Trump put enormous pressure on this Republican-dominated legislature, House and Senate. And the House said okay, the Senate said no, and the Republicans in the Senate said no in a really strong way. This was not one wavering vote. This was the majority of the Republicans saying no. And that says something about Trump's strength in the country right now. And I'm going to get back to Trump's strength in the country, but I do want to tie in a little bit of Indiana history here. Not a lot, but people tend to think about the states in the United States in terms of what they look like today. And Indiana and Southern Illinois and Ohio and Kentucky and West Virginia have a different, and Tennessee have let me see if I got them all. West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky. I didn't say Kentucky. Indiana, Ohio, and to some degree Pennsylvania have a little bit of a different history than the other states in the Union, and that's because they sit on the Ohio River. And the Ohio River is its own draining field from a glacial moraine that was deposited there during the time of the glaciers. It's known as the Shelbyville moraine, and because of that, the agriculture in that region was always different than the north, to the north or to the south of it. And that's the region where we have a lot of corn. That's why we have bourbon whiskey from there, is because whiskey was a way to transport corn to market. That's where there were a lot of hogs. If you've been in that area, you know that they have different colloquialisms than the North does or than the South does. It's almost its own region. And I mention that right now in this context because, and then it had all kinds of historical implications, but because that part of the country has a little bit of a different culture than either the North or the South. It tended to be known as sort of the frontier region before we got the American West. People like Abraham Lincoln came out of it. People tend to forget he went from Kentucky to Indiana before he ended up in Illinois. It's Indiana where his mother dies. And that region of the country has its own literature called the Cincinnati School of Literature. It has its own educational background. So some of our early institutions are from there, but it's also got this sense of don't push us around. And that, I think, for all that I'm going to talk about the other political implications, I think that I could be wrong. I'm not from Indiana, and but it seemed to me that the more pressure that the Trump administration put on people from Indiana, the more they were like, we are not doing what you're telling us to. And that, I thought, was a really interesting dynamic that brought out our past. And again, one of the things that really seems to me more and more obvious are the ways in which our past is playing out in the present, and certainly our horrific past, which we have, but also some of the better pieces of our past are also playing out right now. And I thought that that vote from Indiana might have shown a little bit of, it actually reminds me of a novel from 1871 called The Hoosier Schoolmaster, which is about an Indiana schoolmaster. And it just kind of, these people would have fit in the backbone story of that novel. So, I thought that was really interesting in terms of this afternoon's vote. But what it says for the modern world is something that also might be illuminated by the past. Another question that somebody asked about, and that was, somebody asked me to talk about the know nothings, which is interesting because I mentioned them, I think it was last Saturday on my thing with Joanne Freeman on Saturday morning, in which I mentioned that historians take a look at the Know Nothing movement in the United States, primarily in Massachusetts and New York, in the 1840s and the 1850s. And it was a virulently anti-Catholic, primarily anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant, especially anti-Irish movement, but in which a group of people who turned against immigrants and against Catholics formed a political party officially called the American Party, although they became known as the Know Nothings because they were supposed to answer that they knew nothing when anybody asked them anything about their party. But the reason that I was mentioning them last Saturday, and the reason that they seem like they might be worth having on your radar screen right now, is because historians who have studied the Know Nothing Party, and there are a lot of them who study the 1850s and the 1860s, have noticed that the Know Nothing, well, you can't miss it, the Know Nothing Party rises in the 1840s, 1850s, and then it disintegrates almost entirely, extremely quickly, when you get the rise of the Republican Party. And some of the same people who were leaders among the Know Nothings, notably Henry Wilson from Massachusetts, becomes a major figure in the Republican Party. But crucially, when that happens, when the Republican Party writes its first political platform in 1856 and then reiterates it in 1860 with some changes, what they do is they call for more immigration, not less. So historians are like, what the heck happened there? And the people who have studied it, the biggie is a guy named Tyler Anbinder, who worked at George Washington University for years, retired now. What he figured was, what he learned, what he figured out, was that a lot of people turned to the Know Nothings because they were frustrated by both the Whigs and the Democrats before that period, because they were permitting the spread of human enslavement. And the people who joined the Know Nothings turned against, the economy wasn't working for them, and they turned against immigrants. They turned against Catholics. But the moment that they got an opportunity to participate in a different kind of political party that focused on their own economic needs and focused on returning America to democracy, which it was losing in that period, they all jumped ship from the Republicans. I'm sorry, from the Know Nothings. The election of 1856, the Know Nothings actually run the former President Millard Fillmore. And between the Know Nothings and the Republicans, they get more votes than the Democrats, who win because the Republicans and the Know Nothings split the vote. And that's how we get James Buchanan as a Democrat in 56. But by 60, the Know Nothings are done. And the Republicans, of course, win the election, and then they're off to the races. But the reason that I've been looking at the Know Nothings lately, and I haven't written about them, I obviously will one of these days, at least I haven't written about them in the Letters from an American, I've written about them in other books, is because one of the things that it may be that we are seeing is a similar movement from MAGA and some aspects of MAGA to a new kind of coalition that has not yet taken shape. And that's not to say that the anti-immigrant, anti certain kinds of religion, anti-cultural issue MAGAs will disappear the same way that the anti-Catholic bias of the Know Nothings and the anti-immigrant bias of the Know Nothings largely didn't disappear. That strand will always be there, but the political form that opposition to the governmental structures of the time took look like they could be happening again. And that vote in Indiana is interesting because it says that Trump could not boss around Indiana senators. That's a really big deal. Now, why not? Like, why couldn't he? Because if you look at the way he took off in 2025, when he took office, being able to force through, for example, the budget reconciliation bill, what has become known among Republicans as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, but which Democrats have a whole range of other names for, the Big Ugly Bill, the different things they've called it. The Republicans lined right up. And, if Trump wanted something and, told him to jump, they answered how high. And it was actually a bit of a surprise to people like me that the Republican senators didn't at least try to stand firm on their prerogative of the purse. Congress is supposed to have the power of the government by virtue of the fact it controls the way money is spent. And Trump just took that over. Trump, Russell Vought over at Office of Management and Budget just took it over. Elon Musk at the Department of Government Efficiency just took it over. And the senators were like, oh, well. Even Susan Collins, the Republican of Maine, who sits as the chair of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, which is an enormously powerful position that one works their entire career to get to be at, and where she is, it's really her sweet spot. Even she only pushed back somewhat half-heartedly as Trump essentially took away all her power. So why are they now changing their tune? And this, I think, is crucial for where we are in this moment. And that's that Trump's in real trouble. Trump's political party and his own presidency is in real trouble. There was a poll that came out today from the Associated Press and the a National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. So these are the polls known as AP NORC polls. They're very reputable. And the AP NORC poll that came out today showed that only 31% of American adults, always, when you look at polls, always look at what they're measuring. Like if they say, it's a very different thing to say voters versus American adults versus Americans, right? Anyway, of American adults, only 31% approve of Trump's management of the economy. 67% disapprove. Now, here's the kicker in those numbers. Among independents, that is, you can look at these numbers and the Republicans tend to love Trump and the Democrats tend to hate him, but the independents are what make the difference in an election. Independents, only 15% approve of his handling of the economy, 80% disapprove. Those numbers are extraordinary. Remember, I told you that generally in a society, you'll have a number of about 22 to 25% of people who tend to be reactionary. Like you're never going to get them ever to say that they don't like their guy. Now you're down to 31% among all American adults, but among independents whom Trump will need to win, or the Republicans will need to win re-election, 15% approve. And that's a really astonishing number. But then when you get to of his handling of the economy, when you get to the overall numbers, 36% of American adults approve of the way Trump is handling his job. 61% disapprove. Those numbers are really just extraordinary. And about a year into his term. And there too, only 20% of independents approve of the job Trump is doing. So what's really at stake here? Trump is in trouble on all of his policies. None of them have a majority approval. They are all underwater. But the real kicker is the economy. And one of the things that, you remember James Carville, that Democratic operative, saying during I think it was the Clinton administration, it's the economy, stupid. Well, yeah, it is the economy. But we also know now from new work that's being done out of Harvard and MIT that for all the fact that what people really care about is the economy, what cable news pushes is cultural issues, because what that does, there's a business model there. What that does is it gets more eyeballs than trying to poach viewers from another channel that focuses on the economy. So if you suddenly start throwing bombshells about transgender athletes or racial issues, or sort of what we call the red meat, a lot of people who otherwise would not be watching your channel start to watch it. And that's sort of new people coming in, and they overwhelmingly, those numbers and this phenomenon is seen with the Fox News channel. When it started in 1996, it mobilized a whole lot of people who otherwise wouldn't be wouldn't be participating in the political process, which to me was really astonishing when you think about it, because I actually had a neighbor who was, lovely. And he started watching the Fox News channel, getting involved in all this stuff, and went straight down that rabbit hole. You probably all have experiences like that. And it was really kind of heartbreaking. But, by the end of his life, it was he was in his own world that had isolated him from everybody else. Whereas if he just hadn't turned on that stupid TV, he would have continued to be part of the community. And so we know that people talk about, especially on the right, talk about those red meat issues, but they care about the economy. So you kind of got to do both. And ironically, if Trump had just, gone onto the golf course and drunk Diet Cokes and let Biden's economy play out, it really would have taken off during his term, and Trump would have gotten credit for it. But instead, he felt the need to tear everything that Biden had done down. And what he has done is he has badly hamstrung the economy, both by creating enormous uncertainty and also by sending inflation back up. So you can see that this is deeply troubling to the Republican Party in a few ways. First of all, the elections since the beginning of November have gone heavily toward the Democrats. And by heavily, I mean, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, somewhere between 11 points and 17 to 18 points toward the Democrats since the 2024 election. You have seen repeatedly elections flip to the Democrats, and just Tuesday, I think it was, I lose track of recent time. Voters in Miami elected a Democratic mayor for the first time in 30 years. So this is a huge problem for the Republicans going forward, because there's only a year now, a little less than a year, until the 2026 election. And that is deeply problematic, because they are determined that they have to keep control of both the House and the Senate, in part because apparently Trump is very concerned about getting impeached again, and also because according to a report that came out yesterday, a number of members of the administration are concerned that the International Criminal Court might begin to investigate them over potential breaking of international criminal laws. And they're shady. They're not shady. They're not telling people why they think they have broken laws. But I don't know about you. I don't walk around thinking that the ICC is going to come after me. So clearly something is on their mind. All right, so they're worried about that, and they're determined to keep control of the House of Representatives and also the Senate. And that's going to be really important going forward, because if the Democrats take the House and not the Senate, you can expect that at least two Supreme Court justices, the two older ones, Alito and Clarence Thomas, will retire, so that Trump can stuff more right-wingers into those positions. So in going into 2026, there'll be a huge fight over the Senate as well. And with the kind of numbers that the Democrats are racking up, the Senate is definitely in play. So going into that, the Republicans right now are trying desperately to shore up the idea that they're good about the economy, about affordability, right? So they sent Trump out on Tuesday, I think it was, to Pennsylvania to talk about affordability. But Trump refuses to admit there's a problem with affordability. He tends simply to scream about Joe Biden, who's been out of office now for almost a year, and who actually left an economy that The Economist, which is a right leaning magazine, said was the envy of the world. And it's really not playing anymore to say Biden left us a bad economy. In fact, Biden brought inflation down from the extraordinary highs of the global spike after the worst of the coronavirus pandemic locked down so many countries. By the time he left office, inflation was under 3%, and the goal that the Fed looks for is 2%. So, now you're seeing it climb back up. It's been climbing back since April, I think it was. And that's all Trump. That's, you can't really pin that on Biden any longer. So in this talk, Trump kept screaming about Biden. And then he did a couple of odd things. One thing is he said, we need to have these tariffs that are driving up inflation and making stuff more expensive. Because we need to build factories in the U.S. to supply things like steel. But then he said, we have to have this. And if you're having trouble with prices, you can, stop buying. And he used 37 a lot of times. Your daughter doesn't need 37 dolls, 2 or 3 are fine. And you don't need to buy so many pencils, which I thought was fascinating. I'm a big fan of pencils, actually. I have favorite pencils, but I am a writer, so I use pencils and pens all the time. I have favorite pens too. I even have favorite paper. But I thought, who the heck talks about pencils that way? I mean, to the point that I actually, I know a little bit about pencils, not enough. I don't know if you know that's where Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, his family, that's where he began, was as a pencil maker. I learned a lot about pencils and when they started to get erasers but I just thought, isn't that funny? Like, I'm not sure I've ever heard a president talk about pencils. Anyway, so we talked about pencils, and then he just turned it into a rally speech, in which he just assaulted immigrants. He just went through all, if you will, the greatest hits, which felt very old. It was shocking in 2016. It was sort of horrific to see it come back in 2023, 2024. But now it's like, really? Like, are we really doing this again? And then he went home and posted from his social media account a very, 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 very long screed in which he defended his mental acuity at great length. He talked about everything he had done and then said, in addition to all of that, I go out of my way to do long, thorough, and very boring medical examinations at the great Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, seen and supervised by top doctors, all of whom have given me perfect marks. Some have even said they have never seen such strong results. And then he goes on and on and on and on and on. This is not good. Either in terms of his own demonstration of mental acuity or in terms of the Republican hope to maintain any kind of momentum going into the upcoming election. And then there are other issues at stake as well. As you know, when the Democrats refused to sign on to the continuing resolution. It was the Budget Reconciliation Act that was the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The continuing resolution was the measure that needed to be signed in October, November of this year to continue to fund the government. And if you remember, the Democrats said, in the Senate said, we ain't gonna do this until you extend the premium tax credits that underpin the Affordable Care Act healthcare policies for people who make below 400% of the federal poverty line. And this is why the shutdown went on for so long, and the 7 Democrats and 1 independent in the Senate said after, I think it was 54 days, said, okay, you guys are all paying attention to healthcare now. We're really concerned about how badly the federal employees are being hurt and how badly the country is in trouble. So we're going to go ahead and agree to extend funding for the federal government. But what that did was it brought to the fore this crisis of the fact that in their budget reconciliation bill of last July, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the Republicans did not extend those tax credits. Now, I looked up the numbers today, and extending the tax credits would have cost over 10 years, would have cost about $350 billion, B with a billion with a B. But what they did do is they extended the tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations, which over 10 years will cost $4 trillion. So now they're in this position where the American people, overwhelmingly, the original number was 78%. It has dropped to 75% since a number of Republicans have changed their minds since this became a political issue. But an overwhelming number of Americans want those tax credits extended, because without them, millions of people are going to lose their health care, and the premiums for other people in the healthcare markets is going to skyrocket because of the way that the healthcare markets work. That is, you need to have healthy people in the healthcare bundle who actually don't use a lot of money, because if they're not there and if they're not putting their money in that they're not going to spend yet, the costs go up for everybody else. And the idea is that, you put it in when you don't use it, then it will be there when you do use it, because we're all going to need it eventually. So a lot of people, even including Republicans, recognize that the American people want that extended. They want that to happen. But the Republicans want to kill the Affordable Care Act. They don't want to extend those things. So what you saw was the Democrats in the Senate bargaining for a vote, which is who controls what comes to a vote is a really big deal. So bargaining for a vote on a measure to extend those tax credits for just a year. That's what they asked for. Just give us a year and we'll figure it out from there. I think it was a year, because it's in the House, it's 3 years, or maybe I got that reversed. I can look if you care. Anyway, they wanted, here we go. The Senate wanted to extend it for 3 years. I was wrong. They wanted to extend it for 3 years. And the Republicans just said no. And instead they offered for people who make less than 700% of the poverty line and are enrolled in the cheapest of the Obamacare or Affordable Care Act premiums, that they would make sure they got $1,000 to put toward their $7,500 deductible if they're under 50 years old, or $1,500 if they are over between 50 and 64 years old. Even though the deductibles are $7,500, this is really just a drop in the bucket. And then they said you couldn't use that money for abortion, gender care, and you had to have your citizenship and your immigration status checked. So today, I think it was just today, the Senate rejected both of those bills, making it almost certain that the healthcare premiums are in fact going to skyrocket beginning in the new year. Now in the House, you've got another issue where the House Republicans, many of them are saying, we got to do something here, because it is mostly the Republican-dominated states that are relying on these premium tax credits because of the way the expansion of the Affordable Care Act happened under Biden. Those states had not expanded the Affordable Care Act. Under Biden, they did. Now they're going to lose that money because the Republicans are going to have ended these essentially subsidies. And the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, a Republican of Louisiana, has said, no, I'm not going to do it. So here's another question you asked. Why so many discharge petitions? Brian Fitzpatrick, who's a Republican from Pennsylvania, has started a discharge petition saying, we're going to force this to the floor because I don't want to go in front of my constituents and tell them I didn't vote to extend their health care. And so you're starting to see not only in the executive branch at the level of Trump and J.D. Vance and those people, a pushback against them. You're also seeing it in the House of Representatives against Mike Johnson, who has essentially done whatever Trump told him to. And you're getting pushback against him, obviously from the Democrats who've been against him all along, but also from the Republicans. And the Democrats have been saying all along, we will work with you. We will work with anybody who is willing to do something to help the American people. And now you've got some Republicans who are saying, yeah, if we can get this discharge petition going, we can get this through. And you've already seen a discharge petition that got through the release of the Epstein files. You have seen another discharge petition that is about to come to the floor that was backed by Jared Golden of Maine and a bunch of other guys. I'm afraid I don't remember who else, but it might have been Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. In which they got a discharge petition to force to the floor a vote on whether or not federal workers can unionize, which they've always been able to. Trump tried to take it away, and now they're saying we want to put that into law. So you've got, I think there are 2 discharge petitions that actually have already been forced, but I think there's like 5 others. This is really, really rare. This is really rare for the members of the House of Representatives, essentially to challenge the speaker. At the same time, you're seeing a lot of Republicans announcing they're not going to run for reelection because they want to get out of the House, or simply saying we're going to do whatever we can to protect our reelection through things like these discharge petitions. All right. So one of the things, as I say, is that the House is now teeing up the idea of a vote on some sort of extension of those premium tax credits in order to, the Republicans are madly running around saying, we're going to come up with a new plan. We're going to come up with a new plan. But Obamacare got put into place 15 years ago. And we've been waiting for that new plan now for 15 years. And Trump's been promising since 2016 he would have it to us in 2 weeks. If I were you, I would not hold my breath. All right. A couple more questions here. First of all, you asked me, I think I've talked a lot about what's happening in Venezuela already. A number of people asked me about this ship. And the answer to what is going on with this ship is that we do not know. And I do not know. Maybe you know, I don't. What I can tell you is the real story at now about that ship is that its capture proves that the administration can get a legal warrant for action in the Caribbean when it applies for one. And the difference between what they have done with capturing a ship that appears to have been sanctioned in 2022, they got a judicial sanction for that. They got a judge to say, yeah, you can go grab that. The difference between that and the fact that they are refusing to have anything to do with the court system to justify going after the small boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific speaks volumes. It speaks volumes. And it's going to be, I'm not going to say anything more about that ship right now, except that it throws a lot of calculations off. I don't know if you've seen, but one of the groups that has really objected to it is Russia. It is another piece in play, but I'm not willing to tell you yet what's happening because we don't know. But what it does do is it illuminates again the probable. I'm not a lawyer. I'm going to say I'm a historian. I'm going to say the illegal attacks on the small boats in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific, including the what appears to be an extrajudicial killing of these at least 2 survivors. So that's about all I can tell you about that ship. More generally, somebody asked if government has always been corrupt and we just didn't see it. And I want to really talk about that. Because one of the things that I have had the extraordinary opportunity to do of late, and now I'm being able to bring to you, is the opportunity to hear from people who are involved in government or who are involved in the academy and things like the economy. I got to talk to Paul Krugman today, who is, to me, somewhat larger than life because he demystifies the economy in a way that, I don't know, when I read him, I don't feel like it's work. And that to me is such an incredible gift. Anyway, I got to talk to him today. So that is available on my YouTube channel and Facebook and I don't know, probably other places. Oh, Substack. That's where we did it. Anyway, I want to mention that because it has been my experience from talking to all these people that people are just people. That is, some of them are going to be corrupt, and some of them are going to be pure as the driven snow. And the vast majority of us are good in some ways and bad in others. That's just the way human beings are. But the whole point of a governmental system that has guardrails is to channel what's good about humans into government and force what's bad out of it. Now, obviously, that is not foolproof, or we would be governed by angels. But what is important in that concept right now is that the people who are in power are over the top corrupt. This is an administration that makes the Harding administration, of the Warren G. Harding's administration in the 1920s, look like child's play. And the Harding administration, that's Teapot Dome, that's, all kinds of stuff that where literally somebody shows up. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but with a suitcase full of bills to buy access to two oil fields. We have certainly had corrupt moments. This one's off the charts, and the reason that is the case is not because a Republican baby is headed to corruption and a Democratic baby is not. It's because the system is set up in such a way that if you have two or more viable political parties, and by viable, I mean they can actually win elections, they tend to act as oversight on the opposite party. And you can see this in a place like Florida. And I'm going to pick on Florida right now because if you have two viable political parties, you look at the extraordinary corruption in among people, and I'm going to pick here on former Representative Matt Gaetz. Somebody like him, accused credibly by his own colleagues of crimes, would never have made it out of the lower echelons of government, because he would have stepped out of line. And if the opposing party hadn't seen it and made a big deal out of it, his colleagues would have said, we don't want him around here because he's going to bring us all down. If you lose that opposition party, you lose that culling of the herd, if you will. People start to scratch each other's backs the way the Ohio legislature did recently, or the way Mississippi has done, and because those are both Republican dominated, and you lose that crucial oversight. You also end up with a system where, because one party feels like they can get away with anything, they do. They take extraordinary advantage. So you're seeing here Kash Patel flying his girlfriend around on FBI planes. And you're seeing Kristi Noem hiring a video company that's close to Corey Lewandowski, her aide, with extraordinary sums of taxpayer money. And you're seeing, Don Jr. getting deals that are backed by the American taxpayer. And you're seeing stuff that's completely over the top. And again, it's not that we couldn't come down on this. In fact, there are laws on the books against all of this. There's laws on the books against Trump taking anything from a foreign government. But it's not being enforced because those people are in control of everything. So the answer is, are all politicians corrupt? The answer is absolutely no. And I know, and I'm actually somewhat close to some politicians whom I would trust with my life. Now, does that mean I agree with everything they do? Nope, not a bit. But they're doing what they think is right. And then there are others for whom it's all about getting power and money. And those people too. So the issue is not the people. It's not really even the game of politics. It's the system, and whether or not we are protecting the system to make sure that the bad apples get weeded out. And there will always be bad apples from both parties, and all parties, because that's human nature. But there will also be really good people. And one of my great examples of this, and good people or bad people doing good stuff or whatever, is it's very hard to look at some of our great politicians. And now I'm going to pick on LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was, one of the all-time great heroes, and not see what a deeply flawed man he was. But that's the nature of humanity. So don't give up on our politicos. They're people. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. But more importantly, don't give up on our system, because it's the system right now that is not being honored, and it's permitting the kinds of corruption that you're seeing around you in this administration. And it is my expectation that when we get to the other side of this, we will once again reinforce the laws that stop this sort of action from happening. And it's not just in money taking, it's in things like not honoring the laws about the intelligence community. It's in the corruption of the Justice Department. It's all over the place. And that is one of the reasons, of course, that the Trump administration is determined to stay in power, is because once it is out of power, they can expect impeachment proceedings. Something else somebody asked about is, are there impeachment proceedings? Are there going to be impeachment proceedings? Yes, there have been introductions of impeachment articles against a couple of cabinet officers, I think. They're not going to go anywhere right now, but now that they are in the conversation, that will continue to grow. So there we have that. All right. I think that's enough for today. I feel like there's so much going on. I should do more of these, but right now I just don't have the time. So let me leave you where I always do. In this moment in which the Trump administration is in real trouble and the MAGA Republicans are in real trouble, do not be tricked into thinking that they are not dangerous. In fact, they're more dangerous now than they ever have been. And they will continue to be dangerous because they're determined to continue to hold control of the country, and they see it slipping away. So what does that mean? That means that rather than sort of backing off and feeling like you don't have to worry about the future, now is the time really to keep up pressure. And for a number of people for whom the end of the premium tax credits for healthcare insurance is going to be simply devastating, speak up. All of us need to speak up about that, because that is an issue that is already very much on the table in front of Congress, and make it very clear that we care about that, but also that we care about the other things that you care about. I always mention navigational buoys, but education, the State Department, whatever your lane is, whatever you care deeply about, do not let up. Do not let up over the holidays. We will need to keep this pressure on going right through next year, but you can feel the momentum shift. You can feel the fact that more and more people are speaking out, that people are recognizing that what's happening is not America at its best. And more people who do care about America and about doing what is best for the most of us are stepping up to run for office. And, there have been complaints about some of the people running for office, especially when they have stepped into races lately. I say more power to them. More people, more voices, more people articulating what we care about. No, not everybody's going to get to be a senator. Not everybody's going to get to be a governor. But there is always room in our system for people who are trying to do the right thing. So, if your person doesn't go to the head of the line, that doesn't mean that person is going to disappear. And it doesn't mean that whoever did get the most votes somehow did something nefarious. It simply means this is the way our system works. And those other people are going to need to find other places. And they will, and they do, which I think is one of the really key things. And many of them come back in a new way, in a different time. And that is all to the good. So this is a time, I think, of extraordinary excitement, new ideas, new people. And I have to say, in one of the races, I like everybody who's running. But obviously not everybody's going to win, but I can see places for the people who don't. The good places. So keep up the pressure. And this is not going to be a week's journey or a month's journey. We're already years into it, of course, but I think you can feel, at least I can feel, the momentum really changing. That will create the press of the right wing, the MAGA wing, the Nazi adjacent wing, to try and shut everybody else up and take control of the country. And they could win. But it could also mean that the rest of us wake up and say, hey, listen, we may not agree with each other about many things, but we can agree with each other that we do not want to be ruled by a small elite that is trying to amass all of the nation's wealth and power into its own hands. And I don't know what made those Indiana senators vote the way they did, but they sure are putting wind under my sails to think that I'm not the only one who thinks that way when you get a group of Republicans in Indiana telling the president they will not do what he says, that they are going to protect the maps that are already gerrymandered, but they're not going to do what he says, no matter how much pressure he puts on them. And that seems to me to be a really good message going into the weekend. Do the usual. Call people, make your voices heard, stand up for the values that you care about, and let's get out there and keep the faith.